Good to go. I suppose we'll get started here as people are walking in. How's everybody doing today? Good? Good? How many folks do we have in the room in operations or engineering departments working with industrial control systems? Maybe a few. How about people in IT? Cybersecurity, yeah. So, okay. We'll get into the differences between data protection and process protection, and then we'll look at things through like a hacker's eyes, right? Be better defenders, look through things through the hacker's intent. So my name is Paul Veeneman. I am with the InfraGard Minnesota. So it's the member alliance with the chapter for InfraGard. InfraGard is a public-private partnership working in conjunction with the FBI. And most of critical infrastructure is generally understood that there's about 80% of it that operates under private management, and InfraGard is there to be able to bridge that gap and make sure that when is necessary to deploy resources or provide support anytime an event takes place, that those conduits and those lines of communication are already open. So, and what we'll be talking about today is building resilience into industrial control systems. In addition to InfraGard, I also serve as the president of the Minnesota chapter of ISSA, the Information System Security Association. And I am a senior member of the International Society of Automation, and then also the North American chapter lead for the OT Security Professionals Group. A couple of house cleaning items. So if you want a copy of this deck, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a direct message. Say, hey, Paul, I saw your presentation. I'd love to get that PDF. It'd be super awesome. That'll save you the time and trouble of taking photos of the screens, because I will send you the PDF. If you feel the need to take a photo, if I happen to use that photo in a follow-on LinkedIn post, then I will send whoever's photo I choose, I will send a $50 Amazon gift card for your time and trouble and your photo. If you want, and you just have to let me know, if you'd like me to tag you as the roving reporter on that photo, then let me know, and I'll tag you in the post. If not, you just let me know. I will need an email to put on that Amazon gift card, so you get that digitally. So the session agenda, so we're going to talk about resilient, robust OT programs. We're going to look at some opportunities for asset discovery and protocol discovery within industrial controls environments. We're doing that passively through span ports. We're going to then talk about automated moving target defense and how that can be applied, more particularly in edge cellular communication and devices. And then we'll kind of pair that up with looking at the value proposition for OSINT tools for adversaries and how the automated moving target defense can reduce that value proposition and that data discovery. And then in the appendix, I've got a bunch of other slides that I've had from other presentations that are a little bit more high level. So it talks about an asset management program, incident response, monitoring, detection. What I've attempted to do this year in presentations and conferences that I'm at is to have more actionable information. I don't know, anyone been to S4, the S4 conferences? It's the epicenter of OT conferences for the most part. So Dale Peterson puts those on, usually in South Florida, and then they also did Tampa last year. They were this year, actually, February this year. And Dale Peterson put out a call to subject matter experts and OT security professionals in the space, and he said, hey, there's a lot of high-level stuff that's going on. What we need is actionable information, things that people can do, more ground level, and that's what I've attempted to do, is start looking at things that are ground level, things you can start doing tomorrow, at least concepts that you can look at, rather than inundate you with program and process within a cybersecurity or OT cybersecurity kind of framework. Hopefully you find that interesting. So first, let's take a look at what resilience is. So we've got a couple of sources here. So this is NIST, and then down at the bottom of the ISA 62443, or from the ISA 62443 standard, and an ISA being the International Society of Automation. So It's the ability to operate under adverse conditions or stress while maintaining essential operations and capabilities. Okay, that's awesome. But we see here in the information from ISA, it gets more into the automation, names it directly, the industrial automation and control system to maintain secure operations or secure a process, even when under cyber attack, ensuring continuous functionality, right? And we'll start talking about the differences between a CIA triad in data protection versus process-oriented consequences and impact, where we're looking at safety, reliability, and productivity as we go forward. And then, obviously, it said here, incorporating design features that allow for rapid recovery and adaptation to threats. I should also note, at any point in time, if there's questions, so I'm pretty dynamic as I'm going here, so if there's any questions whatsoever, just raise your hand and ask it, and we just cook along so we can stop, have a conversation, and then just keep moving. I think we'll have, we should have a really good time here between now and the top of the hour. So, pillars of a robust and resilient OT program. A lot of these, as we're looking, are probably things that you would see on the IT side, right? So culture and strategy, asset management, metrics and reporting, continuity and recovery. But here, process integrity. And this is where we take that first deviation where we're not so much interested in the data within a system, but more the process that that system is governing. And when we talk about threat actors and what they're going to do, and a threat actor could be an individual, could be a system, could be a bot, as you guys know, most of the people at this conference would know. It could also be nature. Nature could be a threat actor. You could have a flood that could knock out a production facility. It could be a tornado. It could be a hurricane. So nature can have an impact to our process integrity. So physical security, safety systems. So within an industrial, I'll send you the PDF. Safety systems. So within an industrial control environment, you're going to have things that are called like PLCs, HMIs, RTUs. These are going to be things that within like a manufacturing shop floor or within a water treatment facility or in a substation, power substation. But we're also going to have other PLCs that are part of the safety system. So this particular building or facility probably has a panel for the fire, the fire extinguishers, fire alarms, all that stuff. That could be considered a safety system for this environment. Its sole purpose is to monitor, let's say, the air quality or heat or anything that it would sense. And if there's a fire that breaks out in an automated process, it's going to, one, sound an alarm, so that means exit the building. And then two, it may turn on the sprinklers, or at least wet the pipes, depending on the sprinkler system and the programming. But somebody had to program it. Somebody had to set a series of steps in that program to deal with the adverse conditions that may take place. And the whole goal of the safety system is to ensure the safety of personnel within the environment. Process control environments do the same thing, and we always need to take a look at those safety systems. Environmental controls, documentation of assets, mission essential functions, and the interdependencies. So when we're talking about a process, I may have a series of control systems that are all working in concert in order to end up at a completed product or process or component, right? We can see this in batch processing. We can see this in a discrete process. This could be part of a distributed control system, like a rural water district that may have clean water facility, wastewater facilities, pumps, pump houses, lift stations, wells. This would be part of like a distributed control system where everything is attempting to work in concert for the good of water supply to that surrounding community. And then we have control logic and code. This is probably where we start getting into data, okay? But everything else above that is really at the heart of what we're trying to do. And the quote down here at the bottom by Sinclair Kamoji, and if you follow him on LinkedIn, he's always got some amazing content, and he's been prolific as of late, talking about consequences and impact to control systems. He's looking at some of the security by design and everything that's kind of blown up within that space. And he's really bringing some insightful and some thought to those concepts and what that means from purely an engineering or a control systems perspective. So something to look at here. And this was an article that he wrote in April 2023, a couple of years ago, and you can find this on industrialcyber.co. So Industrial Cyber, for those that don't know, is a international periodical and has a wealth of information that is provided not only by authors and editors within the organization, but then they also get articles from subject matter experts from all over the world. And then they usually have a feature article that posts on Sundays. So every week on a Sunday, there's going to be contributors to an article that the main editor puts out on a weekly basis. So when we talk about things that we want to protect, we're doing it for a reason, right? Risk. And what does that risk look like? So Allianz puts out, and they're just here in town, Allianz, the risk barometer, major business risk for 2025. And what we're seeing here is cyber incidents at the top. So cybercrime, IT network, service disruptions, malware, ransomware, data breaches, et cetera. Natural catastrophes, fire and explosion, machinery breakdown, supplier or supply chain failure. So aside from the typical IT stuff, we see this whole bottom half, 49%, 43, 23, 18. Each of these is a potential risk and a consequence to control systems and operations. Supply chain disruptions with global effects occur approximately every 1.4 years, and that trend is rising. So when you talk about the risks to process control systems or environments, it is a plethora of things that go far beyond any impact or threat actor to data or the security of data. Now, privacy is important. The protection and confidentiality of data is important. Totally get that. But you take a look at all of the other things that can sit here and that can impact any type of a critical infrastructure environment that we have here in the United States or globally within the world. So let's take a look at discovery and monitoring of assets. Now, you can find within the industrial control space or the OT security space a plethora of organizations that are on the monitoring and detection. So there's Dragos, Nozomi, Armis, Clarity, a host of them. And they will do pretty much what we're about to talk here. They are going to monitor traffic. They can sit on span ports. They can do active monitoring, passive monitoring. They collect all this data, feed it through a central space. But a lot of times within some critical infrastructure, such as rural water supply, you have budgets. And as we all know, budgets are getting smaller, especially at the federal level. And then that is trickling down to state level. If you have a manufacturing operation and money is tight, this can also be an avenue. And what we're going to do is kind of walk through setting up a Zeek Elastic Kibana on cost-effective hardware and have a scalable approach with manager and worker nodes. And in a lab, what I had done, and then I also had the opportunity to deploy this to a water district as well, we tried to figure out how far down kind of the food chain we could go on hardware. So we ended up at a Lenovo ThinkCentre M72E, an i3 with 8 gig of RAM and a 256 gig SSD drive. Well, this ended up being about $50 on eBay, right? So they're pretty cheap. You can find them just about anywhere. And then to increase some of our monitoring, we added a couple of USB Ethernet ports that would sit on span ports in the switched infrastructure and allow us to capture this data. And then we installed it on Ubuntu 24. It was a headless server, installed the apps, and then hardened the appliance, and then connected it in. This is what that deployment looked like. So we had the manager node that sat in the main location, and then over the standard configured protocols, and then using the encryption to and from, and the ability to push configuration and to pull data. That's done over SSH or TCP port 22. And then the logger information, so the manager node is not only a data collection and logger, but it's also the front-end interface. And then the other nodes, all they're going to do is collect their information and then send it to the manager node. So in the Zeek cluster data model, each worker node captures its own on its designated promiscuous ports, feeds that data up, and it starts to provide you information about what's going on inside the environment. So now let's take our example network, and then we have the central facility where we deployed the manager node. We also have a plant facility where we deployed our first worker node. And then we have remote locations where then we deployed nodes 2, 3, and 4. And in this case, the VPNs and the communication were in a, I'm probably dating myself here, I don't even know if anyone uses this term anymore, but remote calls the host. So what that means is that the far side was set for DHCP on the firewall to its internet connection. And then we'll get to that later in the presentation on why. And then the main facility, the central facility, had a public static private IP address as the target for the remote site VPNs. And then that's what allowed, over those wide area connections, the worker nodes to be able to transfer that data back to the manager node. And then you can see down here we've got in the legend where some of the systems, so if we had the safety instrumented system, that PLC is in a red. The firewalls are red as well. The standard control systems and assets are in green, and then we have legacy assets as well. Part of the reason that we want to get this data collection and we want to be able to understand is it's more akin to the OT asset management, which is not all that far removed from IT asset management. And it's the same old adage. If I don't know what I have, then how do I know what I'm going to protect? And that's not only the assets in terms of the systems and the hardware, but also the protocols that are under operation. And then also, what assets and protocols in operation is occurring inside those production environments that maybe I'm not expecting to be there, right? And so when I have data collection that's taking place, and I can see what's expected, and then maybe also see what's unexpected. So when we take a look at this running, it's the Kibana dashboards presenting that Zeek data. And I know, how many people have used Zeek, Kibana, and Elastic before? Yep. So the Kibana, as you guys know, these panels, you can create these panels rather simply and then affix them in whatever configuration that you want to create a very nice and pleasing dashboard. While I was building this, I was taking a look for things that would be similar, or how would I want to arrange the data. And actually, anybody run Ubiquity hardware? You got a controller at home or whatever, so you go out to the website. And so on a Ubiquity, they've got on their main dashboard, they've always got that throughput, and it shows everything going across the top. You can see the IP addresses, protocols that are communicating. So I thought this was a good representation. It was easy to look at. But also it gave us a valuable set of information. So I can take a look at the total throughput, the characterization of control systems data, or how we would see, if you could visually see the traffic moving. It's not going to be a lot of data in terms of footprint, but it's going to be lots of packets. So and you can see between the peaks, this is kind of that behavior that we would be expecting. But if we've got peaks of data, this might give us an indicator of something that's performing abnormally, unexpectedly, or an indicator of compromise. It also could be a system, because we have IT systems inside the OT environment. I've got Windows servers, perhaps, Windows workstations, engineering workstations, and from time to time, those Windows systems are going to end up going through updates, and patches are going to be applied. So all we want to do is have an indicator of what's going on and then take an actionable stance towards that. And then when we talk about that, let's take a look here. Identify potential issues such as uncharacteristic data movement, low packet count, high volume. So amongst all of these IPs and the data moving, this one had an average packet of 307.5 packets, but it moved 440,000 bytes. So it had a higher data throughput on a low packet count. That actually happened to be an update that was taking place at the time. So this could be, but it could be an indicator of something else happening within the environment that I wasn't quite sure about. I can see also my protocol distribution. So we're using Modbus TCP. which operates on TCP port 502, and I can see that in this quick graphic here that it should be, inside this environment, it should be probably the most traffic that we're going to see. And again, from a packet level, it is. But I also have some other protocols here that maybe I don't need or aren't necessary. Does anybody know what's operating on TCP port 5353? It's Microsoft. It's on every Windows 10. I think it started with 10 and 11 machine. Anybody heard of MDNS? Yep. So we never really got rid of sharing and caring on Windows networks. So this is the protocol that is used so that Windows systems can share resources that they have, such as a USB printer, and hey, I'd like to use that. Can I use that over the network? Sure, and it sets up this local area network sharing if you set that up. But this is how they find each other, and this is how this information is determined. Well, do I need that inside a process control environment? Probably not. So it's similar to hardening a Ricoh copier. Put a Ricoh copier on a network, have all the default settings. I've got some Apple Talk, I've got some Bonjour, I've got some Windows networking, but really all I need is TCP IP printing because I'm going to set a print server in front of it, right? So we shut down, in least privilege or least permission, we want to shut down the unneeded protocols. And this is how we keep our environment clean within the process control environment. We also are watching the data flows. What does our traffic flow look like? So at a very base level, I've got a lot of interesting information that can lead me or at least help me maintain a sound environment for our process control system. So the next thing we're going to look at is the value of open source intelligence tools and how those are used against us from adversaries when we are taking a look at possible threats that would be from the outside coming in. I think it's good to say, or it's good to understand that more often than not, and I think it's probably a case of this, at this conference specifically, is that hackers don't necessarily hack in. A lot of times they log in, right? So there's always the term, the sophisticated threat hacker, right? The sophisticated threat hacker these days is probably an individual that has the capability to use an open source tool, such as a Shodan, a Zoomeye, or a Census, to use those tools to see public IP addresses that are out on the internet and to look at ports that are there. Are there ways I can circumnavigate either the local security or the security in general against that stationary target, which takes the form of a public static IP address? And am I able to do that to be able to log in or at least compromise it? Other forms of not hacking in, but logging in would be phishing, social media, things of that nature, weak passwords. So in terms of the monitoring, and we pulled these from that, we were monitoring on the outside port with our Zeek, Elastic, and Kibana deployment. And the reason I showed you this screen was to show you this one. So within the first 15 minutes, we had 63 total public IPs that were scanning our public IP on one of those remote sites, right? And they're coming from all over. And then we were able to start tracking the total scans that are taking place. So it's not just the public IPs, but in its consistent scanning from these public IPs. And there's no worker nodes hurt in this process. So we had no impact on performance, but we were seeing all of this tracking that was starting to take place. In 24 hours, it paints a much clearer picture as to what's actually going on. So we had 7,608 total scans across all the public IP addresses, and they were from all over. And you can see, based on the total scans, it started to get pretty consistent. We've got Warsaw, Poland, we've got Romania, and then we had one that we couldn't even determine what the IP address was, probably masking behind some sort of Tor or a anonymizer. We also had this big, thick, we were under constant bombardment from Kansas City and Omaha. And then we were able to track that back. Who's aware of the Palo Alto threat monitoring dashboard, that if you have if you got a subscription or you use Palo Alto, you can go in and you look at that? Well, they get that information by scanning everything and anything that's on the internet. That's how you get those cool pictures where you see all the quote unquote like the scans and attacks going across between continents and within continents. So what we were able to do is trace that back and then find out that, hey, even the good guys are doing a heavy bit of scanning against that public IP in that space. What we want to do then is take a look and say, what is it that we can do in order to reduce that? Because it became apparent, and we always say, what is that? What's the one resource that a threat actor has that we don't? Time. So on the public internet, how do I equate time? What does time look like? A stationary public static IP address, right? As long as it stays there, if I find it, and as long as it stays there, I can continue to scan. And I'm going to continue to scan over a long term. What is it that I'm waiting for when I'm scanning consistently and over a long period of time? A mistake, a misconfiguration, an error. So even if you have a process in place where there's a firewall update that is requested, a ticket is filed, that process change is reviewed, the process change to the firewall is applied, and the process is then reviewed and the ticket is closed out. But at any one of those stages, we could have human error that takes place and then it leaves a port open, and now this scanning becomes effective. Because if the posture of that device that I'm scanning on the public internet changes, now I may have a way in. And it's not even the threat actors, the humans, that are doing this anymore, right? So now all this is automated. So there's systems for the threat actors that are cataloging all this information. And once something to that degree changes, then what they're able to do is say, oh, is that change worth something that I want to take a look at? Is it something that I can use to my advantage? So on Shodan, and this is as of this morning, so if I search on known manufacturers of industrial control systems, Siemens is one of the largest sellers globally, right? 42,004 devices are announcing themselves over public IP addresses as Siemens controllers. Rockwell, which is one of the largest sellers, I think they own most of the American market in terms of control systems. 6,308, ABB 4670, and then Honeywell 2,072. Most of the public IP addresses that are these systems, in addition to TCP port 502, which is Modbus TCP, and if it's Rockwell, because Rockwell's proprietary common industrial protocol of use is Ethernet IP right here, and that's port 44818. But they also had other ports open, like HTTP, HTTPS. There's still a lot of people using, anyone knows TCP port 161? Anyone? SNMP, right? So they're still using a lot of those, and they're open, and it's not a small number that's open ports. Well, what's interesting is if you started going through the ports on, and again, acting as a threat actor, and reviewing the ports that are open on Shodan, and importing a port 80, just browser, http:// to the public IP address, I get this screen. This screen is it is read-only, but this screen is the read-only access to diagnostics information. You drop down this arrow, it's got Ethernet info, network info, bridge info, and process info. And then I also get a lot of information here. So in this conference, there's a lot of sections and a lot of rooms set up with a lot of gear and a lot of things, like there's the lockpick, there's some of the electronic diodes. I think even the gentleman, or one of the presentations that was here in track 1, they were talking about component level hacking, right? What is it that we usually need? Some pretty useful information. What's my a serial number, a firmware, a product revision number, the MAC address? I mean, this is all very good information if I'm not a savory individual, right? So I can use all of this, and now I know the public IP, it's not moving, it's got open ports, and it's giving me information that I can use to see, is there a way for me to compromise this particular device? And this is out there, and these things are happening. You would think that I just put a firewall in front of that, and if that device has to communicate with another site or a group of sites, I would set up a VPN. These are also the majority that we found. The lead block of the public IPs was 166.254. Does anyone know what that range is? Verizon Cellular, reserved DHCPs are static, okay? So we take a look at all of this information together, and you have a lot of, in an era of zero trust, we happen to be trusting an awful lot, is really what it comes down to. Aside from that, it's probably born out of convenience, right? I just need to get this thing connected, and I need something to connect to it. And so somewhere on the other end of this 44818 is probably a SCADA system that is connecting to that device and is pulling back the tag information. And we'll talk about the harmful state that that can put you in, which is this one. So the manipulation of a process in a control system. So if I can commandeer that PLC, and this is the cascading effect and how it gets real bad real fast within a process control environment, is if I can commandeer the PLC and I can talk to the PLC over the Common Industrial Protocol. And also, Common Industrial Protocols, so Modbus TCP, Ethernet IP, there's a few others. They do not have the concept of integrated encryption or authentication. If you're talking Modbus TCP to a PLC and it's expecting that communication on that protocol, it will respond to you. You just have to know what registers to talk to and where to put that data. And so if I can alter the tag information, and the tag information is simply a variable that within the process that the PLC is using, and then it's passing on. It could be to a human-machine interface or an HMI, or it's going to pass that to our engineer at the SCADA system, maybe in a central facility. But what that is a representation to the system of what's actually occurring in the physical world. So in our example here, in the physical world, I have a tank that is getting dangerously low on volume, and it's sitting at 20%. Now, what if I want to create some havoc? I can go into that PLC, and I can go to the tag point where it has what the tank fluid level should be, and I can put a false number in there. And I'll say that's 80%, right? Well, what's going to see that is whatever's talking to the PLC in the process. So I've got a SCADA system that's monitoring the activity on the PLC, and I've got an HMI at the site. And unless I'm sitting right in front of that tank or peering down into it, or what they say, stick the tank, which is easier said than done, when some of these tanks in the fluid, like if you're on a, anyone ever work for the railroad, know someone who worked for the railroad? Anybody? So they have fueling sites. Depending on the region that a Class 1 railroad fueling site, like Burlington Northern, CN, CP, Union Pacific, some of these tanks are like 150,000 to 250,000 gallons, right? And so if I'm able to, now I will say this, it's probably unrealistic that somebody would be able to get this far on a fueling site and change that, and someone's not going to know, because typically fueling sites on a Class 1 railroad are pretty packed with people, and there's a lot of things going on, and they've got engines coming in and out of the yard, and if they were this low, something else is going to trigger, right? But if I had a water supply, if I had a rural water supply, maybe human resource was not as prevalent at the location, and we were doing this all remotely. What if this is an unmanned facility? Because we love automation, and we love technology, and we love to do things without having to have people actually do them there, right? So if I'm looking at this thing remotely, and the PLC is telling me I've got 80%, but yet now but I've got a physical break in the process because I'm dropping below a certain level where I can draw fluid or I can draw water out of there. The threat actor is able to compromise that tag data, causing it to report a false fluid level of 80%. Engineering and operations personnel are looking at it going, what is the problem? It says it's at 80. No, it's at 20. And and if somebody's looking at it physically but isn't going straight to the tank, if they're looking at the HMI, they're on the phone, so they're on site, they're on the phone, engineering's talking to the site resource, what's the HMI say? It says 80, I don't know what's going on. And until somebody physically inspects it and sees what's going on, then something is now, your mind starts to wander. Why is it reporting this? Why is the PLC doing this? Is that an indicator of compromise? So does anyone know, it's funny how history is about to repeat itself to some degree. Does anyone know that what happened about 15 years ago? Boom. So Stuxnet happened. Can you tell me what Stuxnet was? I mean, in general. Yep. So what they did was a manipulation, and they was a very sophisticated sequence of events that happened by an automated piece of software and code, right? I am way oversimplifying that for the purpose of the conversation, but it was a manipulation of the information to give the operators the impression that things were fine when in fact they weren't. So while we're talking about water and a fluid tank level here, Stuxnet 15 years ago, and we're up on the anniversary. Isn't it like, is it this month, next month? Yeah, so, and now we're gonna bunker bomb them. So, shows you how far we've come in 15 years. But, so what they did is they were able to cause the failure of the centrifuges, okay? But it was by putting in false information within the system. To this day, within PLCs that are in operation, and it's not because they're old, this kind of vulnerability still exists. That hole has not been closed. So if you, and down here at the bottom, you can see this Exploit Training Academy. So there's an online location. So for any of those that are in IT and they want to get an introductory course that covers a broad gambit of OT cybersecurity, the Exploit Academy training, and I was able to get this code. And if you want, you can take a picture of this, yeah. But if you don't, and you want the PDF just so you can get that code, just let me know. But it'd be 30% off. And I think I did one of the peer reviews for all of the content, and I think there's something like 15 or 16 sections. And then this is domain 4. Domain 4 is the OSINT review, and what it'll do is it'll take you through all of the common industrial protocols and then the instructor, and it's all a video, so you can do it at your own pace, but the instructor walks through hacking those registers using Metasploit and other tools that allow you to interact with the PLC over those common industrial protocols and alter the tag information and see that present itself on a SCADA system or another screen as that false information. So we talk about what we can do, or what are some opportunities to reduce the time, to reduce the availability of public IP addresses, and to try to reduce the risk of compromise. And the scenario that we were just talking about, we have the automated moving target defense. Has anybody ever heard of AMTD? No, not surprising, and I'll explain why. Systems are built to operate in a relatively static configuration. True. Parameters remain more or less the same over long periods of time. True. Provides the attacker with an incredible advantage as adversaries are able to take their time. Also true. This nugget of information is in the archived content on the Department of Homeland Security. It has been relegated to the scrap heap. Not necessary, not important. Content, information, archive. However, the Executive Office of the President, National Science and Technology Council, back in December of 2011 said, moving target defense enables us to create and analyze, evaluate, and deploy mechanisms and strategies that are diverse, that continually shift and change, and increase complexity and cost for attackers. We always say that threat actors, it's especially ransomware, it's a business proposition, right? So, well, let's make business cost more, right? So we want to limit the exposure of vulnerabilities and opportunities for attack and increase the system resiliency. Talking about a robust and resilient program. So when we started taking a look at this, and again, thinking about the monitoring that we were doing, and we have cellular at the remote edge, What would our goals be? Increase the complexity for adversaries regardless of their level of sophistication. So reducing the time that somebody has to work on something doesn't matter how smart they are. You know, even the most uneducated or unsophisticated threat actor may stumble into open ports that they can take advantage of. What we call script kiddies. I mean, it's kind of the low on the food chain. Or you could have something very sophisticated, such as the elements or the personnel or the resources that went into something like Stuxnet. Okay, Triton, Trisis, Indestroyer. So there's been a sequence of probably 14 or 15 significant sophisticated events since Stuxnet, right? So identify common, generally available, and cost-effective mechanisms in order to do that. DHCP seems like a pretty cost-effective mechanism. It's in most systems that have an IP address. We want to randomize the network addressing. So public IP address changes before OSINT discovery. So I'm never around long enough for ZoomI, for Census, or for Shodan to pick me up. I'm literally not on the radar. Set that DHCP renewal on the cellular modem for every 2 hours. And let's see, Abdi, is Abdi here? Yep, oh, there you are, right? So Abdi, we were having a conversation earlier today, and he had asked, he goes, what if you set it lower? And so my response was, there's a point of diminishing returns. So within the DHCP protocol, what happens at the half-life? Checks in, right? So there's a half-life in DHCP, it's gonna check in. It may even renew itself, or just get back the IP address that it had. But if I was to set a DHCP renewal process for every 30 seconds, because I was going to make it super hard to find me, I get to a point where my VPN never reconnects, right? Because I'm sitting on the end of a VPN, and that firewall is going to want to try to reconnect. Well, I need an IP address in order to do that. So if I'm always requesting a new IP, yes, I'm probably ultra super secure, but now I don't have my connectivity. You could set for an hour, yep. 2 hours we found was good for the industrial controls process. It allowed the software-defined wide area network and the VPN to come back up. And as soon as that pathway was back up and running over the encrypted communication, then the PLC was able to feed its information back to the SCADA system, and all systems were good. Now, I will say, there's going to be some manufacturing processes that are very time-intensive. So it's high speed, high volume, and your system probably has to remain connected all the time. The way to get around that is you could have a local survivable SCADA system. There's a particular platform by Inductive Automation called Ignition. Ignition comes in 2 flavors. You can have a core ignition server that is the SCADA system that would sit at a central facility, but you can also have an edge system. And the edge system is kind of scaled down, and it allows for the PLC to talk to the edge system on-prem and on the local area network in the event that your wide area network is offline. You may see this in very rural areas that have high manufacturing, but the wide area network's kind of sketchy. You know, the telephone boxes are always left open. They get rained on. The pairs aren't there. We haven't got fiber to where it needs to be, which is a lot of times why cellular is so popular these days. Anyway, so we centered in on 2 hours. You could probably increase that to 4, but then now going past like 4 hours, let's say 8 hours. Let's say we want to set it to 8 hours. What if I just give him back to the threat actor? Time, right? So what we found, and we started with our 75, 222, 162, 101, and this was the 7,608 scans. Once we set this thing in place, over the first 24 hours, what we saw is every 2 hours, those total scans only ever got to as high as 511 on a total. So if I told you tomorrow, you could decrease by 94% your threat actor visibility over the internet, would that be something you'd be interested in? Sounds like a sales guy. If I could sell you this, would you be interested in that? So, reduction in scans, 0% visibility. None of the IP addresses, and we've been monitoring the IP address change since February 3rd. None of the IP addresses that we get, and it just so happens, because there is no magic between the Verizon cellular modem and Verizon the carrier. It just so happens that when you reboot a Verizon cellular device, it gets a different IP address. We get lucky. What we'd want to do, and this is where I need everyone's help, is to start working with carriers to alter the DHCP standard to allow for the request of a DHCP renewal and require a different IP address that's not one that I got before be given to me on the public internet, right? So you have to rewrite the standards. It has to go through a lot of standards committees, maybe the IETF, the RFC. So there's a whole process that we need to take place. When we start that now, we can get to a point where what would Shodan look like when we think about those 40 to 50,000 exposed public static IP addresses, if all the remote edge devices that have these control systems that are open and on the internet, what would the Shodan database start to look like? It wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of IP addresses. It'd be tens of thousands, which would only be the statics that are left, which are probably the central or the larger facilities. And where do organizations concentrate most of their cybersecurity investment? At the core. So we're following a lot of the spending patterns that you would have anyway. How much time and resource and effort am I going to put into a small substation, a small rural water facility, maybe a pump house, a well station? And I'm not picking on rural water supply. It's just simply they have dollars and they have to appropriate them where best to be served. And at the main facility, or specifically the clean water facility or the larger wastewater facility, that's where it's best served. And so you just don't have any of those dollars to kick around at the smaller locations or the smaller installations. But you'd have a 94% decrease, and you essentially become invisible on the public internet, for lack of a better term, because you're not discovered. The attacker, and if an attacker does stumble upon your public IP in an open port, the clock is ticking. So the IEEE, anybody know what the IEEE is? Yep. So what I've done is kind of coined a different phrase. Have your internet be ethereal, ephemeral, and entropic. So make it different, make it random, and then expand upon that. So cumulative scans over a 24-hour period versus a static or a non-static DHCP renewal. This is time. This trend line right here, that's time. This is your time. So the movie Target Defense lists a script on severing time from access. What once gave us convenience and attackers' persistence, static infrastructure, now becomes a vanishing point, constantly shifting and forcing the threat to start from zero over and over and over and over and over again. So if you were a threat actor and you found this juicy target, right? And you're getting all ready, you're doing your forensics, you've got your tools, you're about to launch your attack, and then gone. Because the IP address changed. And now you got to start all over again. Where to go? Now what do I do? Well, maybe I go look at another one, find another one, and then that target moves. And then everything is moving. Now, I always get asked the question, could you do this on a local area network? That's probably fraught with disaster to begin with. So if I had internal networks, I had like accounting, and the accounting IP addresses were constantly changing. There are organizations, there's a handful of organizations that are working on this that is an agent-based install, where on a local area network, they have a register that all the installed agents plus the management and all the servers that you'll be connecting to, they all keep track of where everyone's at, and they keep track of the session state and when the IP addresses change. So you could create your internal network and just be this haze of static, much like I'm talking about here on the public internet. What I think is that given the number of public static IP addresses on cellular carrier networks for critical infrastructure that is prevalent today, it's a far better use of time and focus, because these are things that you can do tomorrow. Now, what you'd have to do is go to your network engineers and your infrastructure folks and your wide area personnel and say, hey, I have an idea. I would like to take our remote sites, and I'd like you to get the carrier to change the IP address every 2 hours, and then just watch their heads explode. Because for the last 20, 30 years, because I was one of those guys, I'm a recovering IT engineer, infrastructure guy, before I got into OT. For the last 20, 30 years, what we've done is focus on making things standard, predictable, and stable. And what I'm asking to do is to think like a threat actor and take away their chief resource and time in the presence of static configuration and use that against them. What it does is it takes away all of the convenience that we afford ourselves in a static infrastructure in our wide area network. And that's a big step, right? But I believe the benefits outweigh the complications that we'll have in the short run. So, sophistication, reality, and euphemisms, and I always usually close out with this. We always hear the term, we were compromised by a sophisticated threat actor. The reality is that most of the threat actors that are out there are not to that Stuxnet or that Indestroyer or that Trisis level. And in fact, there's a book, there's two books. There's one book called Cyber Persistence Theory. Has anyone heard that? So it was written by, and actually the lead author is Michael Fisher-Keller. The lead author, he sat down for a fireside chat, I think in S4 2019 with Dale Peterson. And he talked about cyber persistence theory. And he deals with, in a couple of the chapters, he talks about the escalation dynamics. And hacking at a nation-state to nation-state level will oftentimes have retaliatory implications. But what we're starting to see is a deviation from that. We have proxy actors that are acting on behalf of a nation-state actor and creating havoc wherever they can. But they're operating more opportunistically. Conventional warfare, that would be a Stuxnet. Guerrilla warfare is ransomware. Find an open port, get in, get out, exfil the data, put it on the dark web, and then call and then let them know that you're going to extort them for money. That's it. And if at some point along the way, my ransomware impact happens to bleed over into the OT space and take out some of the Windows-based systems that are encrypted, that are managing the OT systems, and I impact the process, lucky day, twofer. That's great. But the primary goal was to get in, deploy the ransomware, exfil the data, and then extort the victim. The reality is, Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a bunch of spare parts, right? So as Obadiah Stane in Iron Man, as probably not the best impression of is it Jeff Bridges? But anyway, so what we have is a less sophisticated threat actor. Okay, they're opportunistic, they're going after soft targets, and they're going to take the least amount of trouble and the least amount of resource to accomplish, and it's going to stay at a very low retaliation level. So in the second book I want to mention is Escalation Dynamics by one of the authors is Sean Lonergan, and they actually talk about rungs on a ladder. And what we're seeing now in terms of the proxy actor attacks that are taking place is it's on the lowest rung, which is why nation states are looking at each other and it gives them plausible deniability. We can say, oh, it's a proxy actor that's acting on behalf of Iran, but there's nothing you can do, right? Because it has to get to a retaliatory level in order to have a nation state take action. But really what we want to do is probably start helping out ourselves and finding new solutions that take away the advantages for the threat actor. And that's what I've attempted to talk about and present here today. So with that, we've got a few minutes here. We'll take any questions that anybody's got. Yes, sir. Right. Yep. So the question is, why not switch to IPv6? How long has IPv6 been around? And then where do we see it in its implementation? Yep. So typically the backbone. Today, the threat is against the IPv4 space. And the question is valid. That's probably a solution. You can move forward with that. It's going to be getting everyone to move with you, right? And so, but I would agree with you. What I'm asking is probably as Herculean an effort as moving forward with IPv6. Both are there. Both opportunities for success are there. But subscribing to the automated moving target defense in an IPv4 public space is something that you could attempt doing tomorrow. Converting your wide area network or the internet sections that you have to IPv6. You could even have, I would ask this question, have you ever had like where you have a client that wants to use IPv6 on their WAN port on their firewall, and it's like the carrier can't even do that. Like they don't even know what they're doing. So there's a challenge at the carrier level as well, whether it's regional, national, or international carriers. But an excellent question, right? But at least that's on the right path. Is that what do we need to do in this space to innovate and move ahead of the threat actor and take away their best resource, which is time? Great question. Anybody else? What's that? Yeah, so IPv6 in the space, I suppose we'd have to talk to Rockwell, ABB. It's hard enough for them to integrate security into their PLC platforms. Now tell them, hey, I want to use IPv6. And they'd be like, what? We're just now getting around to the whole encryption authentication thing. So, and that's where the push security by design that we've seen. And in fact, I've got, there it is. So this is like the appendix. See, when I send this to you, you get all this other free stuff. So here you got security by design principles, CISA and 17 other global agencies. So it's trying to get, and security by design has become like more a catchphrase or a buzz phrase more than anything. But the original intent is that we would design into the components the security necessary. So at like an embedded level, right? It's in the manufacturing process of an industrial control systems manufacturer. They're baking this in at a design or a component level. It's turned in and morphed into a bunch of other things. And nothing against the sponsors out there, but it helps them sell more gear when they say secure by design. You know, it's kind of like, ooh, powered by AI. But a good question in terms of, you know, what would that look like? So, anything else? Well, I do want to be, we're coming up on top, and I want to be mindful for the next speaker. So, I want to thank everybody for attending. I also want to thank everyone for coming to SecretCon. And then a special thanks to Michael Goetzman, who months and months and months ago had called me up and said, hey, would love to have you come out and speak. And I told him, I said, I'm looking at the website. I'm not a hacker, and OT stuff is pretty boring. And I said, most of what you guys do is pretty exciting. He goes, oh, no, come on, man. You'd be like, OT, we don't have much OT here anyway. So, but it was great to come here. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. You've been a great crowd. Hopefully I run into a couple of you. If you've got any questions, I'll be around. Thank you very much.